I hooked up all these vintage monster receivers to finally find out what are the top 5 vintage receivers of all time. But I didn't do it just for me. I want you to tell me your top 5. In our last few episodes, we were touring a massive vintage hi-fi collection in Post Falls, Idaho. But it's time to leave Idaho and go about 45 minutes over to Spokane, Washington, because today's the day we finally find out what are the best vintage receivers ever made. So I'm going to demo each vintage monster receiver for you later in the video for about 10 seconds each. Let me know your top 5 and I will follow up with a video with your rankings and lots of shout outs to you, our subscribers.
Well, come on in, Lenny, and see what I've been working on here.
Wow!
This is my room.
Oh! Now, upon entering Scott's hi-fi room, I was blown away by the sheer number of monster vintage receivers in one place at one time. So before we get into the sound demo, let's look over all these vintage monster receivers. The first monster vintage receiver is the 200-watt Hitachi SR-2004. This is the only Class G receiver we are testing. All right, so you can see how massive the SR-2004 is, and I love how they put the meters on both sides. It really stands out and pops when you're listening to it. A nice warm glow to them. You got all your tone controls over on this side, so and a lot of options. You can go different ranges. You can switch your bass, mid-range, and treble. Of course, monster receivers, so you get the mid-range, and you got A, B, and C speakers, so 3 different speakers there. Going across, there's all kind of different options that you can use on this receiver, but this is probably, you know, being Hitachi's biggest receiver, and Hitachi being the company that makes a lot of the parts for the other receivers, like this is a great dark horse for monster receivers. I would highly recommend this one, any of them from this series, but it is massive in size and really pops. Our second vintage receiver is the 120-watt Akai AA-1200. This is the smallest receiver in our comparison. This is the Akai AA-1200. When you turn this on, you get that warm white glow that goes across it. The tuning dial comes down around the tuner wheel. So the glass wraps around and goes back up. Sort of how the rotels are done. It's just a neat design. Now, the Akai is a lot smaller than a lot of the other monster receivers. I mean, it's maybe 19 inches. It's a little bit bigger than your standard 17-inch, but not a huge monster like the rest. It only has A and B speakers, but that's okay because a lot of people do not use that C speaker anyway, but you still get that mid-range control. Just a shiny, flashy machine. I love the way they designed these switches, and they sound, listen, they really sound nice when you're adjusting them. The third vintage receiver is the 125-watt Fisher RS-1060. It's not Fisher's biggest, but at 24 inches long, it's 7 inches larger than a standard receiver. This is the Fisher RS-1060, one of the biggest Fishers ever made. There was one higher, the 1080, but this is a monster. Look how massive this receiver is. It's absolutely ridiculous. Bigger than most other monster receivers from the 70s, and this one has every feature you'd want. The switches are very nice too. So you got ABC speakers, you got all your tone controls, you got these nice switches here. Oh, I didn't even turn it on. Let's turn that on. Bam! Got the blue light that goes through the tuning dial, and even the tuner dial pointer is actually lit up with that little yellow dot there. So you can scroll across, and just a beautiful receiver. One of the things that I didn't even know about this that I really liked, if you look at the volume control, when you turn the volume up, that red LED actually goes around the volume control. So a really cool feature. Our fourth vintage receiver is the 200-watt Sony STR-V7. These Sony receivers were built like tanks, but more popular in Europe than the US. Now this is a pretty rare Sony STR-V7. It's a massive receiver from Sony, and Sony is one of the companies that's kind of looked over in the 70s. So we're going to power this up here. You can see it's got that green glow to it. So it says incandescent bulbs. You put LEDs in it, it pops even more, but the green was something not a lot of companies did as good as Sony did back then. So you got a couple meters on the top. You got a power meter for the right channel, power for the left, and a tuning meter. Going down the bottom, all kind of switches. Now this one does not have a mid-range control. You just got your bass and you have your treble here, but really nice receiver. When you switch the inputs, the lights go across, and it's a monster. I mean, this thing is heavy. One of the details that I really like about this one, if you look at the knobs, they have that etching on them, sort of like how like a Sansui receiver has across the side of the knob and even in the front. So if you see when I turn it, maybe you see the light glisten a little bit off there. Those etchings really make the receiver pop. The fifth vintage receiver is the 270-watt Pioneer SX-1980. This is considered by many to be the hi-fi holy grail. Alright, if you've watched my channel at all before, chances are you've seen my video on the biggest monster receiver ever made, well, almost, by Pioneer anyway. You see how it made the lights flicker? That's how much power is in this receiver. So this is the SX-1980 from Pioneer. It has literally everything you would ever want on a receiver. Look at the size of the glass on that tuning section. Meters all behind the glass. Another thing I really like about the 80 series, if you look up at the input selectors, when I change them, they all light up different colors, and I find that really fun. I like that. Now this one, of course, has your A, B, and C speakers, so you know, 3 pairs of speakers to it. And then it has that tone control that you can turn on and off. You can make several, like thousands of adjustments you can make in that tone control. So there's one more thing I want to touch on, and that's the tuning dial. If you look at the dial, and I don't know if you can see it from your angle or not, but each little indent there is kind of shaped so that when you move, it kind of glistens in the light of the room. I just think that really makes the receiver pop, and it's one of my favorite things about the entire 80 series. Our 6th vintage receiver is the 110 watt Sansui 9090. Many collectors say this is one of the best sounding receivers of all time. This here is the Sansui 9090. Now this is the original version, not the DB. There's no DB controls here, and there's no DB after the 9090. Now we're going to turn this one on here, and this is one of the best looking receivers I think Sansui ever made. They put the power meters right in the center where they should be, although a little bit smaller than you may want. But then both the signal meter, the tuning meter, and the dial lit up a beautiful blue. Just one of the best sounding receivers ever. When we were down in Florida with Nick, he said this is probably his absolute favorite receiver. You guys should check that video out as well. Does your A, B, and C speakers, bass, mid-range, treble controls, and a plethora of features, making this one of the best receivers of all time. The 7th vintage receiver is the 160 watt Kenwood KR-9600, which has one of the best tuners ever built into a receiver. So here we have the massive Kenwood KR-9600. You have these giant handlebars on the side, and you're going to need them if you're going to try to carry this thing, because it's absolutely ridiculous. Let's turn it on so you can see what it looks like with the lights, because it really pops due to them putting multiple colors in the tuning dial here. So all your meters light up this bright orange, and then your tuning dial itself is the lighter blue. Plenty of features on this. One of the things I really like is how all the controls have this little etch around them that just adds to the feel, because not only do you see it when looking at it for an angle, but a lot of times you'll actually see it on the front faceplate as well. When you turn it, you'll see that glisten depending on your lighting in your room. The dual power supply makes the Kenwood KR-9600 just an incredible vintage monster receiver. Our 8th vintage receiver is the 120 watt Sansui G-8000. This is the only receiver with inputs and outputs on the side and a built-in wire track. One of the larger vintage receivers you'll ever find, and one of the best looking, is the Sansui G-8000. I'm going to turn it on for you, and you're going to see all those beautiful meters right at the top. Big, giant size, bigger than that 9090 series, light up with that warm orange glow that just looks amazing. The gold dial backing is just beautiful, and who can forget these 2 giant knobs in the front? That's one of my favorite parts. Who doesn't like those knobs to grab a hold of and crank up the volume? While looking at those knobs and all the other controls in this, one of my favorite things on this one is also how they did the etching, because it sure sparkles on every one of them. Every button and switch on this just has a great feel to it. Got that square front, and even the detail that they put into the front of these little buttons in the center, they have that etching as well, which is really cool. No other receiver's ever done anything like that. This one has all your inputs and outputs on the sides because it's way too big to pull in and out whenever you need to change stuff around. The 9th vintage receiver is the 140 watt Toshiba SA-7100. It is the most underappreciated receiver in this collection. One of the most underrated receiver brands of all time are the vintage Toshibas, and this is the SA-7100, their biggest one. Just look at the way the detail comes off that dial and the lighting. It's just a beautiful receiver with massive control. Listen to that. Now, let's turn it on, check out what it looks like. All those meters going across the top. A little bit of lighting, not too intense, but you can flip this down and see even more controls and switches under there. They pack a lot into these Toshibas. Toshiba makes parts for a lot of different companies as well, so you have one of those manufacturers that built their own receiver, and it is great. Our 10th vintage receiver is the 140 watt Sanyo JCX STR-V7 It's the only receiver in this collection that I really don't know anything about. All right, now here's one that you don't see every day. This is the Sanyo JCX 2900K. So Sanyo, again, another company that made parts for other manufacturers, so you know their stuff's going to be good. And actually, this is one of Scott's favorite receivers right here. Let's power it up, see what it looks like. Got that warm incandescent glow, almost looks like a Pioneer 50 series. Just a beautiful looking receiver and very powerful at that. The 11th vintage receiver is the 160 watt Pioneer SX-1250. It was the first time Pioneer put a dual power supply in a receiver. All right, so we have what might be one of the most popular receivers ever from Pioneer, highly regarded from the 50 series, the SX-1250. Let's turn it on, crank that. The difference between this and the 80 series is you see the display is more incandescent. All the lights are orange here instead of multiple colors. This one, a lot of people say, had a better build on the inside than the 80 series and sounded a lot more warmer and fuller. But a spectacular build from Pioneer. It's so big. The heat sinks on the back kind of dig into your arms when you pick it up, but it has a lot of options, ABC speakers, lots of tone controls on there, and is a wonderful receiver. Our 12th vintage receiver is the 125 watt Technics SA-800. Technics' second largest receiver, only to the Technics SA-1000, which is the biggest vintage receiver ever made. So this is the second biggest receiver that Technics ever made, the SA-800. Of course, there was one that was bigger that's just enormous, but this is typically the biggest one you're ever going to see in person. Flip that on, you saw those meter lights just like go across. I actually want to see that again. Let's do that one more time. Bam! Right across. They go down to 0, and as you turn the volume up, when there's a signal, they actually just beat, which is a very cool feature. You got 2 signal and tuning meters over here and a plethora of controls across the whole thing. The Technics receivers go from, like, you know, that entry-level model all the way up to this massive SA-800, and they're all fantastic sounding. Just a staple for vintage receivers. The 13th vintage receiver is the 110 watt Onkyo TX-8500. This is Onkyo's largest receiver ever built. All right, so here we have the Onkyo TX-8500 MK2 is Onkyo's biggest receiver, and the Onkyos were very, very popular. We're going to turn it on here. You got that warm glow. You got a signal meter and a tuning meter on the side here. You have all your indicators that when I press them, where are they? They're somewhere right here. Oh, it's a switch. You go ahead and it changes, turns your digital tuning meter on, and you just go across there. They light up that green. Now this one actually did introduce the digital tuning meter, so it has the analog and works as an analog, but also shows you the digital readout like the receiver started to do as you got into the 1980s. Our 14th receiver is the 100 watt Sherwood S-9910. This is a very rare receiver and the sleeper in this competition. So here we have the Sherwood S-9910. Now this is a pretty rare receiver. You don't see a lot of the monster Sherwoods, but it's beautiful. Let's crank this thing on. You see that nice glow of all the bulbs in there. This is what I would say a early 1970s to mid 1970s vintage receiver should look like. Switch the input selectors and they change color on top. And when you turn the FM, the dial pointer even lights up. That's AM. There's FM. And then when you go over here, the signal and tuning meters, when you're on FM, the tuning meter lights up. If you turn off FM and AM, that one goes off. And then if you turn it to auxiliary, they both go on. Got a lot of different options that they put into here to make it more interactive and fun, but this is just a beautiful receiver from the mid-70s. The 15th receiver is the 125 watt Marantz 2325. This is known for its powerful, spacious soundstage and thunderous bass. So this is one of the most popular Marantz of all time, and kind of like the holy grail of Marantzes for most people. This is the 2325, and we're going to turn this on in just a minute. Let's talk about why they have the model numbers again. So you have the 2325, most of them say 22. You say, why is there a 3? That's because it's 125 watts. So that 2 then changes to a 3 to get the 100, and then you get 125 watts. And that first 2 even stands for how many channels the receiver is. So that's how you get the number. Let's turn it on. Oh, with that classic Marantz incandescent glow. A lot of people put LEDs in this. It's a real fun one. This one is classic with a nice wood cabinet. It's a little longer than most of the receivers are, but it's beautiful. Sounds absolutely fantastic. Every option and tone control and whatever you would ever want to do is in this Marantz. And one of the things we want to point out is the gyro touch tuning, where you scroll that across and it goes. See if I can light that up for you. Bam, there's the tuning dial lit up. And as I move the tuner this way, it goes across. So a nice weight. This is like a literal weight built in that you can scroll across. Our 16th receiver is the 125 watt MCS 3125. This receiver was sold by JCPenney's in the 1970s. So this is the Modular Component Systems 3125, or as you would say, MCS. Now this was actually designed for the JCPenney stores, so you may have seen this one, but this is an absolutely insane looking receiver. Let's check it out when it's on. So you got this cool, it almost looks like an LED screen at the top, the way the tuning dial lights up. We can scroll across it. It has a nice smooth scroll. But the real feature that I like about this, you have the power meter down the bottom that shows your output power. But then you have this EQ that as you change it, the lights move up and down across the entire faceplate. And you can do a lot of EQ adjustments. Man, they did a good job making these MCS receivers, and this one is probably the best I've ever seen. The 17th receiver is the 120 watt realistic STA-2100. This was one of the largest receivers ever built and sold by Radio Shack. Boop, 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 boop. Oh, sorry, I'm just playing with it, guys. This is the realistic STA-2100. I just love the way that you can adjust the lighting on this one. I think the way the green stands out behind the tuner meters and the power meters are just absolutely incredible. It's a Radio Shack product, guys. This is one of their biggest receivers they ever made, and it's an absolute gem. Sounds perfect, and hey, who doesn't like flipping through those old Radio Shack catalogs and looking at cool ads of the realistic STA-2100? It's almost like you scroll the input over, and it kind of hits the meters and turns them on. Our 18th and final receiver is the 120 watt Yamaha CR-2040. While it's not Yamaha's largest receiver ever, it's a monster in size and watts. All right, and here you have one of the largest Yamahas ever built, the CR-2040. It's massive. I mean, these Yamahas were just known for making their receivers very, very wide and not too high. So you could fit it in smaller spaces, but it'll take up more room. We're gonna power this thing up. And you got those classic Yamaha, almost greenish lights that light up here. That's more based upon the little caps that they put over the bulbs. So lots of controls go all the way across. You can make the Yamaha sound any way you want, but the real controls that I like are the way that these selector controls look. That square is just a classic look. I really love it. So to recap, here are all the Monster Vintage receivers that we are comparing today. Now when Scott told me the plan was to listen and compare every one of these Vintage Monster receivers, I was questioning how we were going to do that, but he explained to me that he built a magic box to help with the process.
What I try to do is listen to all this stuff, and I enjoy them all the time. And the only way to can really do that is if you can select them. So I built myself a speaker selector switch. So the one on the left here is just a switch that will choose whichever receiver that we want. So receiver 1, position 1, receiver 2, position 2, receiver 3, position 3. So I can go all the way through 10. And same with my speakers. I can choose whatever speaker system I have it set up with. In this case, HPM 100s. And number 3 is my Polk 10s. So speaker selector switch, pretty cool.
Now the Monster receivers weren't the only hi-fi in the room. Scott also had several pairs of large speakers, 2 Pioneer spec racks, reel-to-reels, and a few other components. All right, let's check out what we got. This is the fluoroscan system from Pioneer, and it's on like a custom rack, which is just incredible. You have the RT909 reel-to-reel with the custom reels and the hubs. It just looks amazing. You come down here, and you have the SA-7800 integrated amp. Like, look how beautiful that looks. It just shines. That was built to look good. And to help it sound even better is the SG-9800 equalizer that actually lights up all the way across it. Even that, just a beautiful shine to it. Coming down, if you want to expand your sound even more, you get the RG2 dynamic expander, which just opens up the audio in your room when you use that. Now for cassette deck, we have their largest one, the CTF-1250, which has that door that kind of covers up when you're not listening to the cassette. So you can actually, if I stop it and pull the cassette out, close it up so the heads don't get dusty. So this is a 2-motor cassette deck, and it's 3 heads. So we're just going to slip that cassette in like that. Hit play, the mechanism goes up and your meters start to move. So it's a wonderful cassette deck, and all the way down the bottom we have the TX-9800 tuner, and this one of the best tuners of all time, matches up with this SA-9800 integrated amp. So that's the whole 9800 set, all 3 of those pieces. So that's actually rare to see them all together. Now here we have the RT901, and it's a different reel than the 909, and you might ask why. Well, this one does not do auto reverse. So the 909 over here has an auto reverse feature, the 901 does not. Besides that, it's pretty much the same, but you can just see the buttons are a little bit different on the right side on each of them because of that auto reverse function. Moving over, we get over to more of the spec rack, right? So on top, you're going to start with the PL600 turntable from Pioneer. Then we're going to go down. This is a really rare piece. This program selector, the U24, you can go on here and you can change your amps that you have going. 3 different amps. You got tape monitors, so you got 4 different tape switches. You can choose your source. 4 other tape monitors for your source, 2 auxiliaries, and 3 turntables you can hook up to that. So that's a cool piece that you could add to a system if you have a lot. Underneath that, you got a reverb. So this is the SR-303, and remember, as you listen to the music, it actually beats to the music. So if we had it on with music playing for you guys, you would see that it would actually pump that light out to go with whatever, you know, level of reverb you were doing. So going down, we have, of course, the famous Spec one of the ones I really love and have on all my personal racks back at the store. Just a great preamp that you can use, plenty of functionality. And how this actually hooks up, it hooks up to the Spec 4, the Spec 2 amp, this one being the Spec 4 with the giant meters and the volume controls on each side. Basically, this amp only has 1 set of outputs on it, so you can only hook 1 pair of speakers up to it, unless you run it back up to the preamp where there's actually a speaker box built in so that you can make, instead of just 1 pair of speakers coming out of the amp, you actually get 2 if you run it back up into the Spec 1. So that's a cool feature and a lot of people don't know about it. Down here you get another SG-9800 EQ. Of course, just a very, very popular EQ. There it is lit up. As you move it, you see those lights at night when you turn the lights out, and it's just a good looking feature, but one that actually works with the system as well. Going down a little bit farther, we have the TXD-1000 tuner. It's a great tuner, digital tuner, not analog. But if you want the fluoroscan system, that's the tuner you're probably going to want to get with it. Coming down here, we have 2 more reel-to-reels, and they both look the same, but they are not. Or they are. Yeah. They are. Oh, okay. So this is my favorite reel-to-reel of all time, it being a 7-inch, even though 10 inches always are a little bit better looking overall in the room. I just love the way the meters look in the center of this. And as you're playing the tape and the volume's going up and down on the meters, as it's not on that one, but this one down here, those meters go up and down, and I think it's just a great aesthetic to go with your music. They made 2 models of this just like they did the other, and they made one, the RT707, which is what these are, that has an auto reverse feature. Then they also made a RT701 that didn't have auto reverse. So that would be what the difference would be between them. The buttons would be a little bit different. The other thing that's cool about both of these is they both have that original reel there. So the Pioneer reel, you can flip the sides, it says 1 and 2, but that's a nice piece how they put the spokes going across. Just a cool aesthetic piece to go with those reel-to-reels. All right, now going up on the shelf up here, we have like the most famous Pioneer 8-track, the HR99. This is a great model. It has little meters that glow on the inside there, but just a nice 8-track. It's heavy duty. There's a lot of 8-tracks out there that are very light, not that great. That one is. And oh, there's a little treat up here. These are the original PP220A hubs for the Pioneer RT909 or the 901 reel-to-reel. That's a neat accessory to have laying around. Underneath that, you have the very famous Fisher 500C. So this is going to be your tube receiver from Fisher, the most popular one ever, and also one of the most hardest to find in really good shape. So the 500C, it's a great, really, really warm sounding tube amp, and you know, it's a Fisher, so it's nice. Over here we got a realistic STA-2300. This is one of Radio Shack's models, one of their bigger ones. This is when they added the powered output meters on them, so they added a little bit of digital. You get into the 80s, it's probably like an 80, 82. You know, the buttons are a little bit different than the 71s, a little lighter, but the finish still looks great. Lots of lights. It's a cool model. And when you go up, you even get that Harman Kardon receiver. We get the HK450, which has a nice backlight when it's lit. A very entry-level receiver, but very nice and hard to find. Now we're gonna go to one of Pioneer's other reel-to-reels. So this is the 1020L, a little bit different looking than what we saw in the 909 because it's for a different series. This is probably going back to like a 74, 76 model, but it's a 10-inch. So you can see all the room that's up here. That's because you put a 10-inch reel on it in that hub, and it takes up, and it will look beautiful in your room or on your system when this thing's going with those 10-inch reels. All right, so this is probably one of the more popular Technics receivers. So how the receivers work with Technics, you know, the bigger they get, the more rare they get. When you get down into like that 400 to 700 series, a little bit more common, but 700 is a little bit more powerful than the rest. So you have that monster receiver feature with that mid-range, lots of controls, lights up beautiful, and you even have those power meters that we saw in the 800 earlier that as the music's beating, it goes like side to side, which looks really cool. Coming over here, we have a very rare quad Sansui QRX-9001. They made a US version, they made a European version that has a slightly different model. This one has the cool feature. First off, you got all 4 meters light up, plus the signal and tuning meter on top. It looks fantastic, it's massive, but as you turn the tuning dial, the light goes up and down like in diagonal motions across the entire front. It's really nice. This one even still has the original Dolby tag on it. A lot of them actually do. A lot of people never took those off by pulling the knob out. You can see underneath it has the Dolby system logo, because no DB after the model number. All right, then over here, the components he's using, plays vinyl on, he's got the Yamaha YPD-71. This is an incredible turntable. That whole series is. But the one thing I do want to definitely point out is if you look down at the cartridge, he has a Shure V15 Type 4. So some of these Shure cartridges are the absolute best cartridges that you can get on these vintage turntables. So I would highly recommend looking. A lot of them still have that on there. Coming over here, we got an Akai GX635D reel-to-reel, 10-inch reels, beautiful reel-to-reel. Kind of resembles like the 747 reel-to-reel. Just Akai's got the glass heads. They're going to last absolutely forever, longer than any of us. And look at the glowing meters. That's just a nice piece that goes with all reel-to-reels have meters, I've been told, or at least most of them. But the way Akai did their reel-to-reel just looks fantastic. Underneath, he's got the Nakamichi MB8, which is a really cool system. So this is actually a 5-disc CD player, and you're just going to put 1 disc in at a time, and it adds it into the system, so you can play disc 1, disc 2, and so I'll stop that. You get on to disc 3, and on the inside, it's actually going to change the disc, start playing disc 3, you know, if there's a CD player in there. I really love the display, how bright that is as well. Very underrated product. We actually saw one recently in like a rose gold. Super nice CD player. So speakers in this room, we're going to start out with like a Baltimore classic. This is the Polk Audio Model 10s. Like this speaker, if you have this, you're probably never getting rid of it. And the other good thing about this, even though it's a speaker from the 70s, these parts are actually fairly easy to find and replace. So a great speaker, whether you get a Model 10 or 7 or really any of the other Polk lines and the SDA Polks, they're all beautiful. But talking about beautiful, underneath that is, of course, my favorite speaker of all time, the HPM 100. So that's the 100-watt version, where you have the super tweeter that I can't hear, you got the regular tweeter that I can probably hardly hear, and then you have a mid-range and the driver made in that white cone. You know, these were designed by the designer from the JBL L100, so we're also very famous, and there's a big argument out there which one's better, but for me, it's this one. It's the HPM 100, and if that's too big for you, you can go down to the HPM 60s right here, so it's a little bit smaller driver, but it's going to take this same mid-range tweeter and super tweeter. So just driver's a 10-inch instead of a 12-inch. Fantastic speakers in their own right. There you go. So you got on here that really big 12-inch driver on the bottom, which is kind of tucked away, kind of how Klipsch did the Heresy back then. So you can see it's actually screwed from the other side of the wood onto the front. So to work on these, everything's out the back instead of the front. 2 mid-ranges, 2 tweeters here, and a horn. It's a nice design for back then. Definitely one of their bigger speakers for sure. Now the speakers we're going to listen to today are the Pioneer HPM 100, which may be my favorite speakers of all time. We have 1 pair of speakers on each side of the room, 1 pair for the first half of the receivers and 1 pair for the second half. The HPMs were in pristine condition, but one common issue with vintage speakers are the grills typically need to be fixed. So next we went over to Scott's workshop to show you how to fix a pair of grills before we start listening.
This is a grill cover that I replaced on the HPM 40, and it's really pretty easy. This is an original one here, and I just simply take my razor knife, I just cut just like that, pull them off. I do that all the way around, but I leave the original staple on there because you're going to staple over it. It doesn't matter if that's there. It'll go on the face of the speaker without any problem. So here's one, of course, that I put the new grill cloth on, staple all around, and all I have to do is finish up this little bit here, and it's done. And I'd be happy to staple for it if you want to see it. So, of course, to finish up this here, all I do is just run run a staple along this fabric, and it's a pretty cool fabric. It stretches so you can get it nice and tight without any folds that you can see from the outside when you're all done. And then just take my razor knife and just trim off that little bit, and it's all done. Speaker grill. And of course then I have my emblem badge. I'll find the little hole which is right there, and I'll just push that in like that. HPM 40s. Just like new.
Now, after we do this sound demo, I'm going to tell you my top 5, and there's some surprises in there, but I want to know your top 5, or you to rank them all and let me know which you think's the best to the worst. So watch this section over a few times and let me know what you think so we can include you in the next video. Right now we're on the Sansui 9090. Let that beat hit again. Actually, we're going to switch it back to the 1980 real quick. Back to the 9090. Alright, so that's the first 10 on the HPM 100s. Now let's go to the second 10 monster receivers. Check it out. Alright, now comes the fun part. I'm going to tell you my top 5 going through, and then I want you to let me know in the comments what your top 5 were, or if you have any of these and what you think about them. Coming in at number 5 is this one down here. This is a Marantz 2325 at 125 watts. Just a beautifully clean. It sounds so good. It has the right amount of warmth, right amount of clarity. It's just a perfect blend of what you would want out of a really good receiver. So my number 5, the Marantz 2325. All right, so for number 4, we're gonna come down here, the G-8000 for Sansui. The detail is really nice. It's clean, it's got a lot of power behind it, a good crisp sound, but it got kind of overshadowed by another one that I'm gonna show you that came in at number 3. So number 4, I got the Sansui G-8000. All right, so the surprise of all of them to me was the Toshiba SA-7100. The Toshiba completely surprised me. When I was going back and forth between that and the Sansui, I was surprised at how much it actually had a little bit of warmth to the sound of Toshiba over the Sansui, and just took it by a notch. I could just feel the power behind it, kind of edging the larger Sansui G-8000. So I really have to say, even if for the sheer wow factor that I didn't expect the Toshiba to sound that good, I'm putting it at number 3. So before I show you guys number 1 and 2, which I kind of just hinted to, It's coming down to these two. It's coming down to the Sansui 9090 and the Pioneer SX-1980. Really good sounding receivers in their own right, but they both have two different traits that, depending what you like in music, you're going to choose one or the other. So for me, I think the number 2 is actually going to be the Sansui. So this is one that at first I thought was exactly what I wanted. Like, I listened to it and I'm like, wow, that's overwhelmed the 1980. It's got more kick, more punch behind it. Sounds super clean, a little bit of warmth, but cool. But then I realized when I was testing them out at the end, unlike when you guys were, I had the loudness on the Sansui and not on the 1980. So number 2, we're putting the Sansui 9090. And then number 1 for me, and I know you're gonna say, well, of course it was number 1 for you. That's your favorite one. Yeah, but when I cranked the loudness on the 1980, it just edged the Sansui, and not because it sounded better, but it's a different sound. It's more cleaner in the mids and the highs, and that's what I like. So, you know, I'm not a real big bass guy. You still got the power behind the bass in this one, but it edged the Sansui out for me in the highs and mid category. So I really enjoyed how that sounded. I mean, when they like shredded the guitar, you could totally hear every detail when you go with the 1980. There you have it. Is the 1980 the best receiver of all time? You tell me.